All right. What's the story of Genesis? What's the problem God is trying to solve? Separation, right? Adam and Eve eat the fruit, and God and man can no longer cohabitate in the same space. Billy, why can't I give God a high five right now? Am I a perfect person? No. God is perfect and I'm not. You've probably seen it before. You put oil and water together and you try to shake them together. What happens? They spread, they separate. Perfect and imperfect don't mix. And so God does not want to be separated from His creation. When He created Adam and Eve, where was God? He was walking among them. That's what He wants. And so how is He going to fix that? That's what this is, this chart, the plan of salvation, starting with Adam and then through his kids. Then we get to Noah and Shem and then to Abraham. And what's the promise that God gives to Abraham specifically? Okay, you have a son, and by whose son, what will happen?
He will give him the wedding of one nation. Okay,
many descendants. And specifically, through your descendants, Abraham, all the nations of the world are going to be blessed. And how could this blessing take place? Through whom? Who blesses the whole world? Jesus does. So this line, as I mentioned before we started, is going to go all the way down to King David, and then all the way down from King David to Jesus. So this is a story of Jesus. In fact, later in the Bible study, we're going to go to Matthew chapter 1, which is the genealogy of Jesus, and we're going to see all these descendants listed out just like this. Okay, Abraham has a son, name is Isaac. Isaac has a son, his name, well, two sons, Esau and Jacob. Jacob's story, he's the cheater, right? And he cheats Esau, his older brother, from his inheritance and his blessing. And Esau wants to do what to Jacob? Kill him. And so Jacob, he tails it out of there. He runs to Laban, his uncle, where he marries who there? Rachel and Leah, right? Both of them. Of course, we talked about last week the surprise that it was Leah at first. But Jacob agrees to work for Laban for 14 years to have both of them as his wives. And he has many children. And we talked about last week how Leah and Rachel were almost at war with each other, naming their kids to try to get Jacob's attention. When does Jacob decide, all right, it's time to leave Laban and go back home? Do you remember from last week? Who is the last child born? Joseph. Whose child of the four women? Rachel, the favorite wife. Once the favorite wife has a child, Jacob says, let's get out of here. So they leave Laban kind of sneakily. We talked about this a little bit. Laban follows and says, why did you leave without telling me? And eventually they make up, and Jacob starts to go into the promised land. Who's waiting for him in the promised land in Canaan? Esau is. So is Jacob really excited? No, he's afraid. He's very fearful. And in fact, last week we talked about this. He sent his wives, all his belongings forward towards Esau. And Jacob, he does what? He stays back. That's when God appears to Jacob and they wrestle together. All right. We're going to have to move some chairs around. It's all right. And they wrestle together. And why does God do this? Because before this happens, Jacob is fearful. After God wrestles with Jacob, what does Jacob do? He goes. He's not so much filled with fear anymore. God showed Jacob that when I am with you, you can do anything. You can even wrestle with God and live. That's why Jacob's name is changed. Do you remember this? Israel. Do you know what, Frank, do you remember what Israel means? Okay. The name literally means he strives with God. That's Jacob's new name. so that Jacob might know that he does not need to be afraid of Esau, because no matter what happens when God is with Jacob, no one could possibly defeat him. That's where we left off. Jacob is now limping because of the whole wrestling situation towards Esau, and they're going to meet up. Questions on that recap? All right. Genesis chapter 33. That's where we're going to be today. And Jacob, this is verse 1, lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau was coming, and 400 men with him. So he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the 2 female servants. And he put the servants with their children in front, then Leah with her children, and Rachel and Joseph last of all. What does that reveal to us about Jacob?
Chicken.
Say again?
Chicken.
I didn't hear you.
Chicken.
Chicken, okay. Well, Jacob actually, he goes right to Esau, but he lines up his kids. And he favors Rachel and Joseph. Now, we haven't touched on this yet, but this is going to kind of build up, kind of foreshadowing towards later in the chapters ahead. How do you think the other Joseph's brothers felt about that?
I'm sure they were.
Okay, you think it makes the other sons really, man, we love Jacob. He's our favorite father. He's putting us first, so in case Esau comes to kill us, we die first, and he can hightail it out there with his favorite wife and his favorite kid. This might be foreshadowing a relationship deteriorating with Jacob and his sons. That's right. All right. In verse 3, he himself went on before them, bowing himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. But Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. And when Esau lifted up his eyes and saw the women and children and said, "Who are these with you?" Jacob said, "The children whom God has graciously given your servant." By the way, notice that a theme we've been talking about over and over. Children come from who? From God. The children God has given your servant. Then the servants drew near, they and their children, and bowed down. Leah likewise and her children drew near and bowed down. And last, Joseph and Rachel drew near, and they bowed down. Something significant. First of all, what's Esau's reaction? Has he come to kill Jacob?
Love.
One of love, right? One of forgiveness. And interesting enough, Jacob, remember the blessing he stole? We're actually going to go back to Genesis chapter 27, real quick. The blessing that Isaac, his father, gives Jacob, that was stolen, basically. It was supposed to be for Esau. It's Genesis chapter 27, verse 29. This is the blessing that Isaac tells Jacob. "Let peoples serve you and nations bow down to you. Be Lord over your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you." What is Jacob and his family doing for Esau? Bowing down. So Jacob might be trying to make things right here, trying to return the blessing by bowing down. And we'll see later, Jacob says, "Esau, you are like God to me." Actually, let's actually go to that part. Let's go back to chapter 33. Let's keep going. Verse 8. Esau said, "What do you mean by all this company that I met?" In other words, the gift sent to Esau before. Jacob answered, "To find favor in the sight of my Lord." But Esau said, "I have enough, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself." Jacob said, "No, please. If I have found favor in your sight, then accept my present from my hand. For I have seen your face, which is like seeing the face of God, and you have accepted me." How does Jacob encountering Esau compare to our encountering God. What's similar about it? We approach God in total sin. Okay, we are humble and repentant, but how does God treat us? Does he come with 400 men to chop our heads off? Mercy! So Esau, like God to us, is showing mercy and grace. I mentioned in our prayer today, Old Testament may talk about a merciful God. And so Jacob sees Esau and his mercy and said, seeing you is like the face of God who has had mercy to me on my journey. Verse 11, please accept my blessing that is brought to you, because God has dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. Thus he urged him, and he took it. Then Esau said, let us journey on your way, and I will go ahead of you. But Jacob said to him, my Lord knows that the children are frail, and the nursing flocks and herds are a care to me. If they are driven hard for one day, all the flocks will die. Let my Lord pass on ahead of his servant, and I will lead on slowly at the pace of the livestock that are ahead of me, and at the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord in Seir. So Esau said, let me leave with you some of the people who are with me. But he said, what need is there? Let me find favor in the sight of my Lord. So Esau returned that day on his way to Seir. But Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built himself a house and made booths for his livestock. Therefore the name of that place is Succoth. And Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, on his way from Paddan Aram, and he camped before the city. And from the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father, he bought for 100 pieces of money the piece of land on which he had pitched his tent. There he erected an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. All right, how does the saga with Esau conclude?
Why didn't he go to Seir? Why didn't Jacob go to Seir?
With Esau?
Yeah, well, he said he was going to do it.
Yes. Well, again, so here's the thing. Esau and Jacob, we're going to hear a little bit more about that, right? How, don't think of this as just one person walking around. When Esau approaches, who does he have with him? 400 men. And is it just 400 people? It's also all his livestock, all his possessions. Jacob, at this point in time, is it just Jacob walking around? No, it's his family, all his servants, all the livestock he took from Laban. If you remember that story from last week, he's wealthy too. Later on in the scriptures, we're going to hear that both of these people are so rich that there's not enough land to support all their livestock. There's too many of them. So they really can't fit together, so they both go their own ways and they inhabit different parts of Israel at this point. What's interesting about this? Jacob ends up where? Where is he now? Canaan. What did God promise Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? That they would inhabit what land? The promised land, which is? Canaan. So is God keeping his promises here? I think so. Even though Esau was there and Jacob was afraid, things worked out. All right, that's the simple conclusion of this story, but we got a lot more ahead. Any questions on this? Lori?
I just noticed that it was Sukkot.
Yes.
And isn't that a holiday, a Jewish holiday when they walk?
The Feast of Booths. Yes, I'm pretty sure.
Is this where it comes from?
I don't know that one. My Jewish holiday knowledge is limited, but I could look it up later, I guess. Yes. All right. The last part, a lot of this seems like needless information at the end of this chapter, but it's actually these last couple of verses are important, that Jacob buys land from whom? Verse 19. From the sons of Hamor, Shechem's father. These are people who live in what land? Canaan. So they are Canaanites. What did God say about the Canaanites? What was going to happen to them? Well, not quite destroy them, but they live in a land, and who's going to take that land away? His people. All right, so the Canaanites sell Jacob some land. What's going to happen next? Chapter 34. The defiling of Dinah. Now, Dinah, remember who she is? Daughter of who? Leah. Okay? Now, Dinah, the daughter of Leah, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the women of the land. And when Shechem, the son of Hamor the Hivite, the prince of the land, saw her, he seized her and lay with her and humiliated her. And his soul was drawn to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. He loved the young woman and spoke tenderly to her. So Shechem spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Get me this girl for my wife." Okay. So, this is going to be one of those stories where no one is the hero. We've talked about this a lot. In the Old Testament, we'll have a story where a bunch of stuff happens, and who are we cheering on? I don't think anyone is the hero here. Let's start with Dinah. What did Dinah do wrong? Who was she hanging out with? The women of the land, the Canaanites, right? That could be a major problem because God said, hey, I'm going to take the land from the Canaanites because of their evil, because they have rejected me. But that is a minor problem compared to Shechem. Now, who's Shechem? Prince. He's the guy who Jacob bought land from, okay? And what does Shechem do but take Dinah and sexually assault her? And then this lust, it turns into love, supposedly. Almost kind of like abusive type of thing, where he now speaks tenderly to her to try to woo her. This whole order is completely off, right? First of all, he's a Canaanite, rejected God's promises, and we'll get to more about Canaanites in a little bit. But also just, not only is it sexual intercourse before marriage, what the Bible speaks against, but it's rape, which is awful. Then he says, okay, Dad, go to Jacob and get this woman to be my wife. Let's keep going. Questions on that, by the way, before we keep going? Yeah, bleh is right. It only gets worse. Now, Jacob, oh, by the way, Eddie, if you heard that happened to your daughter, what would you do?
I would be sitting here.
Yeah, you probably in prison because you killed someone, right?
Yeah.
What does Jacob do? Now Jacob heard that he had defied his daughter Dinah, and his sons were in his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. So what does Jacob do? Nothing. Remain calm might be like the positive spin on it. The answer is nothing. He holds back, maybe, but you're going to see later on that Jacob's character may not be great here. After all, in this chapter, there is no hero. Okay? Verse 6, and Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. The sons of Jacob had come in from the field as soon as they heard of it. And the men were indignant and very angry because he had done an outrageous thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, for such a thing must not be done. But Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of my son Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him to be his wife. Make marriages with us. Give your daughters to us, and take our daughters for yourselves. You shall dwell with us, and the land shall be open to you. Dwell and trade it and get property in it. What's the problem here?
Well, there's a lot.
Who is Hamor? Canaanite. And what was going to happen to the Canaanites? Well, yes, this, but also God was going to take the land from them. And so basically, hey, give up the promise God gave you, Jacob, and just marry us. Intermarry with us. It's all good. Don't worry about it. Verse 11. Then the rapist speaks up. Great guy he is. Verse 11, Shechem also said to her father and to her brothers, "Let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me I will give. Ask me for as great a bride price and gift as you will, and I will give whatever you say to me. Only give me the young woman to be my wife." What a scumbag. What is this about a bride price? We've heard about this before. Engagement present, so to speak. Jacob and Rachel, what was the bride price? 7 years of labor, of work, right? To almost, again, we don't really do this in the modern age anymore, but you know how in weddings sometimes the father will give the daughter away? That's kind of this idea that she's property. We don't do that anymore, right? But that there's a price to be paid. Again, ancient days, nowadays. We're in the New Testament now. We talk about all women have been set free. But that's what's going on here, right? And so Shechem says, what do I need to pay? I'm in such love with this girl. What kind of love could it really be? And so Jacob doesn't answer here. Who does? In verse 13. The sons of Jacob. The sons of Jacob answered Shechem and his father Hamor deceitfully, because he had defiled their sister Dinah. They said to them, "We cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a disgrace to us. Only on this condition will we agree with you, that you will become as we are, by every male among you being circumcised. Then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to ourselves, and we will dwell with you and become one people. But if you will not listen to us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and we will be gone." Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem. All right, there's two reasons why the sons of Jacob would propose this. What's the obvious one? Set him up. Okay, this is a plan of deceit, and we'll see the plan executed in just a second. But what's the second reason? I already talked about the issue with Hamor's proposal is you would be intermixing the Canaanites and God's chosen people. But the sons of Jacob say it would be okay if what? If they get circumcised. You know, sometimes we wonder, why does God hate the Canaanites so much? They have no chance to be faithful. Was their destiny truly just to be wiped out? Well, the truth of the matter is, there are a lot of people that were not Abraham's descendants who became God's people through circumcision. Real quick, we're going to go to Exodus chapter 12. I got the large print. Hold on, let me get the small print out so we get the same Bible. Exodus 12 is page 54 in my Bible. It's chapter 12, verse 43, which would be the 55, page 55. Is God a racist? No. He is a merciful God. And even if you are not part of Abraham's descendants, is there still a place for you in God's people? The answer is yes. Verse 43. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat of it, but every slave that is bought for money may eat of it after you have circumcised him. No foreigner or hired worker may eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside of the house, and you shall not break any of its bones. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. If a stranger shall sojourn," what does sojourn mean? Wander, be around you, right? "Shall sojourn with you, and would keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised. Then he may come near and keep it. He shall be as a native of the land. Whew. But no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. There shall be one law for the native and for the stranger who sojourns among you." So,
Who's going around checking all these?
well, I was about about to get to that, right?
Interesting question over there.
In verse 18, we just read, Hamor and Shechem said, they're great with this plan. They're like, yeah, we love it. I'm like, really? You're like excited to have some surgery done on you? Like, that doesn't sound great at all. Certainly this would be something that would be publicly, and there would be a lot of, obviously wouldn't be done in a public setting, right? But public ritual would be done, right? That people would know. Like, you wouldn't just, if you were a foreigner to become a person of God, I guess so, right? Yeah, yes. So you're actually getting to a kind of cool point. This is a big deal when we get to New Testament times, when we get to the Jesus era, because a lot of the Jews believed to be a person of God, you needed to be circumcised. This is a big topic in the book of Galatians. Actually, did a Bible study on Galatians. It's online if you want to watch it. But we believe that we are saved by faith. That is the mark of our circumcision, right? That is our mark as people of God. We would go a step further and say in our baptisms we are marked by God. That is the circumcision of our flesh. But in the Old Testament times, how were you a person of God? You followed the covenant, which means to be a person of God, you were circumcised. So that's why the sons of Jacob asked Shechem and Hamor, if you want to be part of us, you got to become part of us as the people of God and the covenant. But of course, as you mentioned, Al, this is not done in a kind gesture. This is a setup. Questions on that? I love Genesis. You remember a couple months ago, we were going through like Daniel and Revelation, and we had to stop every verse to explain every single thing we were reading. Sometimes it's just solid story, solid narrative, a little bit easier to go through. All right, back to verse, it would be verse 18. We finished with 18. Their words pleased Hamor and Hamor's son Shechem. Again, don't know why. Don't know why you want to do that. Well, maybe we reveal it in the next couple of verses. And the young man did not delay to do the thing because he delighted in Jacob's daughter. Now he was the most honored of all his father's house. So Hamor and his son Shechem came to the gate of the city and spoke to the men of their city, saying, these men are at peace with us. Let them dwell in the land and trade in it. And behold, the land is large enough for them. Let us take their daughters as wives, and let us give them our daughters. Only on this condition will the men agree to dwell with us to become one people. When every male among us is circumcised as they are circumcised, will not their livestock, their property, and all their beasts be ours? Only let us agree with them, and they will dwell with us. So why were they so? Yeah, we'll do that. We'll get circumcised. Why are they so excited? If you're a poor guy and you marry a rich princess, all the possessions of the kingdom suddenly become yours. I mentioned before that Jacob, he's an extremely wealthy guy at this point. If we intermingle with them, we get some of the wealth. So certainly Shechem and Hamor's motivations are not pure either. Questions on that? Okay, keep going. Verse 24. And all who went out of the gate of his city listened to Hamor and his son Shechem, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of his city. On the third day, when they were sore, two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, took their swords and came against the city while it felt secure and killed all the males. They killed Hamor and his son Shechem with the sword and took Dinah out of Shechem's house and went away. The sons of Jacob came upon the slain and plundered the city because they had defiled their sister. They took their flocks and their herds, their donkeys, and whatever was in the city and in the field, all their wealth, all their little ones and their wives, all that was in the houses, they captured and plundered. Then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have brought trouble on me by making me stink to the inhabitants of the land, the Canaanites and the Perizzites. My numbers are few, and if they gather themselves against me and attack me, I shall be destroyed. both I and my household. But they said, should he treat our sister like a prostitute? So let's start with the end, and then we'll go back from there. Jacob's complaint of what Simeon and Levi did. What is it?
Took revenge by killing them all.
Say again?
Took revenge by killing them all.
Not even that. He's not saying, oh, you did a bad thing by taking revenge. He's afraid that, oh, you killed some people, they're all going to come after us. It's Jacob being a scaredy cat. Nothing about, oh, thank you for exacting justice, right, for my daughter. Nothing about that. By the way, Dinah, remember, is whose daughter? It's Jacob and it's not Rachel. It's Leah. And did Jacob really love Leah? Do you think Jacob really loved Leah's children either? No, Dinah might have been like not really that important to him. Jacob, not a great guy. How about Simeon and Levi? What do you think? Were their actions justified? Did they do the right thing here?
In their eyes, they were right. In their own eyes, they were right.
In their own eyes, they were right. Did God tell them to do this?
No.
That's the thing in the Old Testament. We're going to hear a lot of, God telling the Israelites, you got to go and wipe these people out. And the type of people they're wiping out are the type of people that, like Sodom and Gomorrah were about, right? Wicked people who have abandoned God, completely evil. It's God exacting justice on earth. But when God doesn't tell you to do something, you shouldn't do it. Could God have redeemed this situation? Yes. What would have happened if these Canaanites became circumcised and became people of God? Could good have come in from this? Sure, from an awful situation, good could have come from it. But Levi and Simeon take matters into their own hands. Vengeance belongs to the Lord, not to man. So, who's the hero in this story? No one. It's not Jacob. There's no one. No one. All right, questions on this story?
I don't know, you say that Dinah was not favored by Jacob, possibly. It's like it's your child.
Yeah.
You born her.
Yeah.
And why would you just eat, no matter who it was from?
Yeah.
So,
It's crazy to me, right? I mean, the fact that Jacob, at the very beginning, would line up his kid by order of most importance to him. And that's going to bite him in the butt in just a little bit in a second. All right, let's keep going. It seems like that, right? All right, we're gonna summarize chapter 35 and 36 so we can get right to Joseph. Okay. I'm going to summarize it, so I'm going to talk to you about it. We're just not going to read every verse because I'd like to get to chapter 39 tonight. It's not going to happen. We can believe. Right, Sarah? All right. So after this point, the start of chapter 35, Jacob's afraid. Why is he afraid? Because his sons just murdered a bunch of Canaanites. So God tells him, go to Bethel. Go to the place, that's the place where Jacob's ladder, remember that story, right? Where he saw angels ascending and descending from heaven. So he goes there, and as he's walking there, he notices that all the Canaanites, they have terror of him. God put terror in these people's hearts to protect Jacob. Again, when God is with you, you're safe. No one can be against you. You're protected. And so Jacob goes to Bethel, and there God once again gives the same promise he gave to Abraham, to Jacob, that from you would become a great multitude of nations, and your name would be Israel. After that point, where was I? Then, yes, Rachel and Isaac. So, Rachel is Jacob's beloved wife. As they're traveling, Rachel gives birth one more time, and she dies in her childbirth. She gives birth to Benjamin. who is the youngest of now the youngest of Jacob's children. So the two beloved children are Joseph and Benjamin. There, Rachel dies. She's buried. And then, I'm going to skip over, well, I guess I'll talk about this. And then after that, all of a sudden, sometimes the Old Testament is like this. You'll have one thing happens and then something completely unrelated happens. Reuben, who is Leah's oldest, sleeps with one of Jacob's concubines, Bilhah. Remember the four women, two of them were the servants of Rachel and Leah. Bilhah was one of them. And so Reuben ends up sleeping with her, further maybe creating a rift between Jacob and his children. That happens. And then after that, Jacob finds out Isaac, his father, is dying. So he goes to Isaac, and there he buries him with Esau. After that, in chapter 36, we hear about Esau's descendants. And again, we're not going to read through all of it. But what I mentioned before, right? Now it's Esau and Jacob in the land. Isaac is dead, Rachel is dead, and they're getting so rich, so wealthy, that Esau notices, we can't fit in this land any longer together. So Esau actually leaves Canaan. He leaves the promised land. So who's left? Jacob's left in the promised land, fulfilling the promise God would have for him, that through him the nations of the world would be blessed.
So wait a minute, didn't you just say that Jacob went to Bethel?
Yes, Bethel's in Canaan, right? He traveled from place to place after that. This is what happens when you summarize. I don't give every detail out. One thing I want to notice real quick before we start chapter 37, what's kind of interesting about genealogies. I want to remind you, very beginning of Genesis Bible study, Moses, who's writing this, is he writing figuratively? These events symbolize things? Or is he writing them as if they are actual historical events? Actual history. What's a clue that might be the case? You ever read a genealogy? This father had this son. This son had this son. This son had this son. Very historically, like you ever do Ancestry.com, you go down the family tree. This is written as if these are the actual descendants of Edom, well, Esau, but also known as Edom. Okay, that's where we left off. Jacob and his sons are now in the promised land. The favorite boys are Benjamin and Joseph. And how is Jacob's relationship with the rest of his kids? Meh. It's not great. All right, chapter 37. Let's read a little bit now. Joseph's dreams. Jacob lived in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. These are the generations of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was pasturing the flock with his brothers. He was a boy with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, with his father's wives. And Joseph brought a bad report of them to their father. Now Israel, who's Israel? Jacob. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any other of his sons, because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. Now Joseph had a dream. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field, and behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule over us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Then he dreamed another dream and told it to his brothers and said, "Behold, I have dreamed another dream. Behold, the sun, the moon, and the 11 stars were bowing down to me." But when he told it to his father and to his brothers, his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall I and your mother and your brothers indeed come to bow ourselves to the ground before you?" And his brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the saying in mind.
Wait, isn't Rachel dead?
Yes. So again, there are two ways to interpret this. The first one is the chapter 35 is not in chronological order, and this happens before Rachel's death. The second, it might just be in a reference to his mother, right? That it's not, she is dead, right? But just, this dream has to do with the whole family unit. That, I think the second one is more likely. Although sometimes Genesis does move a chapter out of chronological order. We've seen it already happen before. All right, how does Jacob ruin his relationship with his boys even more? The coat of many colors dresses his youngest like a king. And I mean, the Bible explicitly says that he loved him more than any other, right? Going back, Eddie, you were talking about, I think it was Gil, you were talking about how could a dad have a favorite? No, Joseph gets the coat of many colors.
Benjamin's the youngest.
Yeah, again, this could be right before Benjamin is born. If you're talking about chronologically what's going on here, right? But Joseph is also, if Benjamin is alive, Benjamin's just a little baby right now. Joseph is the boy who could probably study intense with his father, and he would shepherd. Oh, by the way, he's 17 years old. Were you smart as a 17-year-old? Maybe you shouldn't be tattling on your brothers to your dad. Oh, they're doing a bad job shepherding. Hey guys, I had a dream last night that you're all going to worship me one day. Maybe not great. These two dreams, what do they mean?
Reference to Egypt, Joseph.
Okay, so we're going to get to Egypt, right? But this idea that these are future visions. In fact, we're going to hear later on that the fact that there are two of these visions is very significant. Because when you have two visions of the same thing, it is evidence that God is giving you a vision of the future. So we hear that Jacob actually considers what Joseph says because he had two visions of the same vision. Now we know, do his visions eventually come true, Frank?
Yes.
Yes, they do as we get into Egypt. Questions on that?
When you were talking about Benjamin before,
Yes.
Joseph doesn't seem to know about Benjamin yet.
Yes.
Benjamin was born yet.
So it is quite possible this happened before Rachel died. But, again, we will hear about Benjamin in this narrative later on. But let's keep reading, and I'll talk about a little bit more about the timeline. Verse 12. Now his brothers went to pasture their father's flock near Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers pasturing the flock at Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." And he said, "Here I am." I said to him, "Here I am." So he said to him, "Go now, see if it is well with your brothers and with the flock, and bring me word." So he sent him from the valley of Hebron, and he came to Shechem. And a man found him wandering the fields. And the man asked him, "What are you seeking?" "I am seeking my brothers," he said. "Tell me, please, where they are pasturing the flock." And the man said, "They have gone away. For I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them at Dothan. They saw him from afar. And before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer." Can you hear the spite in those 4 words? I mean, wow. "Come now, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. Then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben, who is Reuben? Firstborn. How has Reuben ruined the relationship with his pops? He sleeps with one of the servants, right? So already there's a rift between the two. But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." Why do you think Reuben is trying to defend Joseph? Do you think there's any chance he would compare the relationship with his dad if he lets the favorite son die?
No.
None at all. So maybe he's trying to make things right here. Verse 22. And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit here in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand to restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe, the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat. And looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. These are probably traders traveling. Then Judah, enter the character of Judah, we'll hear more about him, said to his brothers, "What profit is it if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." And his brothers listened to him. Then Midianite traders passed by, and they drew Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. They took Joseph to Egypt. What does this sound familiar to?
Why did they sold him out?
Okay, they sold him out, right? Shekels of silver almost sounds like, yeah, the betrayal of Jesus by Judas. I'm not saying there's a one-to-one connection here, but certainly, it's not great what's happening here. We're going to find out that Reuben's not around. Judah takes charge here. And we're going to hear a little bit more about Judah. You might think, okay, we've come this far down the line. Who's going to be next in the line to Jesus? Surely it'll be Joseph, right? Because Joseph's the angel child. It's not Joseph. Who is it going to be? Judah. We'll talk more. We got a few more minutes. We'll get to that. Verse 39. When Reuben returned to the pit and saw that Joseph was not in the pit, he tore his clothes and returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and where shall I go?" Why do you think Reuben says that? He's responsible. And what's going to be the result of this? He won't be in the favor of his father. He knows that it will destroy his father. His other brothers, they aren't really thinking right now. You know, sometimes when you get angry, get a little bit blinded by rage, you kind of make some irrational decisions sometimes. This is probably what's happening here. But Reuben knows how his father is going to react. But he's not innocent, because what do they do? Verse 31. Then they took Joseph's robe and slaughtered a goat and dipped the robe in blood. And they sent the robe of many colors and brought it to their father and said, "This we have found. Please identify whether it is your son's robe or not." And he identified it and said, "It is my son's robe. A fierce animal has devoured him. Joseph is without doubt torn to pieces." Then Jacob tore his garments and put on sackcloth on his loins and mourned for his son many days. All his sons and all his daughters rose up to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "No, I shall go down to Sheol to my son mourning." Thus his father wept for him. Meanwhile, the Midianites had sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, the captain of the guard. So, was Reuben's reaction right? How does Jacob react? Does he get over it? No. He says, "I will go down to Sheol mourning." Now, I want to ask you, do you know what Sheol is? Okay, some people believe it's hell. But that'd be kind of interesting, Jacob thinking that Joseph is in hell.
Did it have the two sides when Jesus with Lazarus was talking to the rich man on the other side? There was the gulf, like across the...
Okay, all right.
That it had two sides in Sheol.
Once we get to the New Testament, Jesus' time, we get this distinguishment. It's not a word, is it? I don't think so. A distinguishing between heaven and hell. But not until Jesus' time. Donald.
Wasn't that also mentioned in when he went down with the whale?
Okay, yes. My soul down to Sheol, right? Jonah.
Is that like a reference to like death?
Okay.
Itself, maybe?
So this is a good segue. You're right on it, Donald. The Jews of the Old Testament, the Pharisees and the Sadducees, what was the Sadducees' problem Jesus called out? They didn't believe in the resurrection of the dead. They didn't believe in an afterlife. And the reason they could not believe it is because the Old Testament's very kind of doesn't really talk about the afterlife much. The most we get is my soul going down to Sheol, which could mean two things. It could mean an afterlife for the dead, or it could just be symbolic for death, the grave, right? We hear a lot of times in the Psalms and the Proverbs that people, when they die, they go down to Sheol. They just die. They are in the grave. And so, what is Jacob saying here? I will follow Joseph all the way to just grave, to death.
Isn't hell divided paradise, and also the other side would be where the rich man was.
So Frank, you're right. That's not revealed to us until the New Testament. In the Old Testament, we don't really get a difference between heaven and hell. We don't get the two places. We just get one place where the righteous and the unrighteous both go. They all go down to, in the Old Testament anyway, Sheol, right? Which might just mean, well, the Sadducees would just say it's the grave. The Pharisees might say it's like the realm of the dead, the afterlife. It's not until Jesus' time, if you go real quick to Matthew chapter 5 maybe, that we get this differentiation. That's the word I'm looking for, differentiation. Matthew chapter 5, it's going to be verse... Oh, where is it? Where am I? Come on. I have it here. I'm sorry. Matthew chapter 18. That's why I have my notes. Thank you. Matthew chapter 18, verse 7. No problem. It's my bad. I'm not going to rush you, Bill. Yeah. This is what Jesus says, and there's many places Jesus talks about hell, but this is just one example. Woe to the world for temptations to sin, for it is necessary that temptations come, but woe to the one by whom the temptation comes. And if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life crippled or lame than with 2 hands or 2 feet and to be thrown into the eternal fire. And if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. It is better for you to enter life with 1 eye than with 2 eyes and to be thrown into the hell of fire. The word hell does not appear in the Old Testament. It's not until the New Testament that we hear about this hell-heaven dichotomy. Until then, this is what Jesus reveals this. This is now, we know this, but it's not until then that that's revealed to us. So Sheol, at this point, probably means just the grave, the realm of the dead. Okay? Questions on Sheol?
I Googled it. It says it appears in the Bible 65 times.
Yep. Yep, in the Old Testament, it's all over the place. All right.
It's like symbolic, right? Rip your eye out.
Yes. Yes. I'm sorry. That was a loaded text to throw at you and not talk about this whole thing. Yes.
It seems to say in the Old Testament sometimes when someone dies that he's left with his fathers.
Yes.
So is that like, Sheol?
The idea would be they are in Sheol, which is either, again, the Israelites were divided on this. Is it symbolic for just grave? There's no afterlife, it's just they're at sleep in death? Or is it there is a realm where the dead come out? We do hear a little bit about the possibility of such a realm. I'm going on a tangent, right? But if you remember the story of Saul and the medium of Endor, maybe this is familiar with some of you. King Saul, the first king, bad king, didn't love God, didn't obey him, so God stopped talking to him. And so he's like, I need to know what to do next. So you know what I'll do? I'll go talk to a psychic. And I'll raise up the ghost of Samuel, one of the last prophets. And so he does that, and Samuel's spirit comes back to talk to him. So maybe the Old Testament does hint at a little bit of this Sheol being a realm of the dead. They are still wandering around, walking around. But we know in the New Testament, Frank, that whole thing is cut out because we know that we are asleep until the last day we are resurrected, and we will be at the last day before the judgment seat, and God will separate us like the sheep and the goats, some to life and some to everlasting contempt. That's where the heaven and hell dichotomy comes from. It comes from Jesus, actually. Questions on that? I'm sorry, it was a long tangent. All right. Can we do one more chapter? Will you forgive me if we go a little long? I want to at least get through Judah and Tamar so we can do all Joseph next week. All right. I told you that Judah's character was introduced. Judah is going to have a part to play later on in Joseph's story. So it seems like we're following Joseph and then we just get interrupted. We stop talking about him. But Judah is important to talk about here. Verse 1 of chapter 38. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adullamite, whose name was Hira. There Judah saw the daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua. He took her and went into her, and she conceived and bore a son, and he called his name She conceived again and bore a son, and called his name Onan. Yet again she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him. All right, what's the problem? Canaanites. Judah's mixing with the Canaanites. Oh, great. He has 3 sons. Verse 6. And Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Then Judah said to Onan, go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. What is Judah talking about here?
Tradition they had, the brother was responsible for the brother.
The term is called Levirate marriage. We talked about this in Matthew. We talked about this in Ruth, right? Back in those days, what was the retirement plan?
Death.
I guess, right? But how are you going to put food on the table before you die, Bill? Your kids are going to do it. So is it a problem if you are a young widow with no kids? You get no retirement plan. And so God, making sure that this would not happen, adopted this idea of Levirate marriage, where it would be the next of brother's duty to give the widow a child, a son, so that she would have someone to take care of her as she got into her old age. Make sense? Verse 9. So the first son is dead, so it's Onan's responsibility. Verse 9. But Onan knew the offspring would not be his. Here's a crazy one. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste the semen on the ground so as not to give offspring to his brother. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Bible can have R-rated moments, I guess, right? What's happening here? Why would Onan not want to give Tamar a kid? Okay, all right. Whose son would he really be in the idea of Levirate marriage? Not his own, but his deceased brother. And he didn't want anything to do with that. So he does this contraceptive kind of thing, back in the old days, I guess, right? And his semen's on the ground, and she doesn't bear a kid. And does God like that? Nope. Kills him. Wickedness. So, there's one more son left. So, what should Judah do?
Wait for the young one.
Right? Well, even not even wait. Just marry him, and then when he's old enough, she should get a child. Verse 10. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death also. Then Judah said to Tamar, his brother-in-law, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up. For he feared that he would die like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. Again, a mistake. He should have given him immediately to her. So she had some security and hope that she would be able to have a child to care for her. Verse 12. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnon to his sheep shearers, he and his friend Hira the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, "Your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep," she took off her widow's garments and covered herself with a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat at the entrance to Emnom, which is on the road to Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. So what's Judah's mistake? He did not fulfill his duty. And Tamar is just sitting there like, when is this going to happen? So she takes matters into her own hands. Verse 15. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, "Come, let me come into you." For he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. She said, "What will you give me that you may come into me?" He answered, "I will send you a young goat from a flock." And she said, "If you give me a pledge until you send it." He said, "What pledge shall I give you?" She said, "Your signet and your cord and your staff that is in your hand." So she gave them to her and went into her, and she conceived by him. Then she arose and went away, and taking off her veil, she put on the garments of her widowhood. When Judah sent the young goat by his friend the Adullamite to take back the pledge from the woman's hand, he did not find her. And he asked the men at the place, "Where is the cult prostitute who was at Emnom at the roadside?" They said, "No cult prostitute has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Also the men of the place said, "No cult prostitute had been there." And Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own, or we shall be laughed at. You see, I sent this young goat, and you did not find her." Okay, what happens here?
Maybe you can find out later.
We'll get to that, right? But before we get to that point, what is Tamar's plan? If Judah will not give me his son to marry, to have a kid with, then what will I do? I'll have children with my father-in-law. That is her plan. We'll get to this. Like, are these heroes here? Are we cheering them on? Like, not really here. Okay, so she dresses as a prostitute, and Judah says, "Oh, this sounds like a good idea. My wife just died. I'm going to sleep with a prostitute." And they make a deal. "Hey, I'll give you a goat for your services." And basically, she says, "How do I have the proof that you're going to give me this goat?" And he gives the signet and the staff and a cord, right, as evidence of that. When Judah tries to get the goat to her, she's not there. Because what has she done now? She's back to the widow. She's dressed up, and Judah has no idea. Here comes the world's biggest burn. Verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told, "Tamar, your daughter-in-law, has been immoral. Moreover, she is pregnant by immortality." And Judah said, "Bring her out and let her be burned." Because again, this kind of thing was very not allowed back then. It's still against God's law. It's still against God's law. I don't think we go out and burn these people. I think we should follow Jesus' example where he says, "I forgive you, go and sin no more." There might be some hypocrisy here, right? He wants to burn Tamar for adultery. What did he just do?
It was her fault.
Oh, go no. He decided I'm going to sleep with a prostitute. So there's a lot of hypocrisy here. Here we go, verse 25. As she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, "By the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant." And she said, "Please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff." Then Judah identified them and said, "She is more righteous than I, since I did not give her to my son Shelah." And he did not know her again. When the time of her labor came, there were twins in her womb. And when she was in labor, one put out a hand, and the midwife took and tied a scarlet thread on his hand, saying, "This one came first." But as he drew back his hand, and behold, his brother came out, and she said, "What a breach you have made for yourself." Therefore his name was called Perez. Afterwards his brother came out with a scarlet thread on his hand, and his name was called Zerah. So, how does the story conclude? Judah says, "Let's burn her at the stake." And Tamar says, "Hey, father-in-law, I was made pregnant by who these belong to. Do you know who these are?" Right? And Tamar, and then Judah, he's humbled. He kind of learns his lesson and says, "Man, I messed up here." And of course, spares her. And the Bible actually says he did not know her again, right? Because it was a sin to do that. He did not continue in sin. But she received 2 children out of this whole story. A huge mess where no heroes are to be found. But I'm going to close with this. One more verse. Go to Matthew. I mentioned earlier we were going to go to this chapter. Matthew chapter 1. The very beginning of the New Testament, right at the start. First verse, first chapter. It's page 807 in my Bible. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac was the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. In other words, by whom does Jesus come into the world? Through Tamar. Through a woman who slept with her father-in-law, and father who went into her thinking she was a prostitute. That's the line of Jesus. That's who Jesus comes from. So what does that say about Jesus and his plan? Does God work through sinners? Sure. Does God work through the messes of our own lives? Can God accomplish good even through evil? Yes. That's the story of Genesis, that through all this brokenness, and again, these guys aren't innocent either, God accomplishes his will. Jesus is still born. Because if Jesus had to come through perfect people, we'd still be waiting, right? Lori.
Do we know if Tamar was a Canaanite?
We don't know that. We don't know. We don't know who she is. Just that she is. So, all right. But we'll talk a little more about. So again, there will be Gentiles in this line too. The story of Ruth we talked about before, right? Ruth is part of that line. She is not one of the chosen people of Israel until she's introduced in. But we're going off and it's late. Sorry. Any final questions? All right, let's pray, shall we? Dear God, Father, and thank you for reminding us that you are merciful to your people. You are merciful to us. And that you do good things through broken people like us. You accomplish good through evil, good in our suffering, good in the mess we can make our lives. And sometimes it's not even our fault. Sometimes the mess just happens to us. But you have a purpose. You have a reason. Keep us strong in faith that we may trust in you, that you are in control. And as our good Father, you care for us. You love us. And you have a plan for us. That through Jesus, all the people of the world will be blessed when we will see you in heaven, our bodies back glorified, and you will wipe away every tear from our eyes. While we wait, Lord, keep us safe this night. Protect us this week. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you, guys. Next week, hopefully.